Hello and welcome back to another Parry This History video. Today we are discussing another alternate history video, where we send some time-traveling troops to a significant battle in history and speculate wildly on what the likely outcome would be. Previously, I sent 50 modern Army Rangers to the Alamo, and 50 World War I infantrymen to the Battle of Bunker Hill. If you're interested, I recommend checking out those videos after this one. But for today, we are taking a look at the Battle of Hastings, and speculating about what would happen if we sent back a Napoleonic regiment of riflemen back to 1066 to defend England from the Norman invasion. So, what can Sharp's rifles do against William the Bastard? Stick around and find out. So first, let's just start about the real history about the Battle of Hastings. In the early morning of October 14th, 1066, the stage was set near Hastings for a decisive encounter that would shift the course of English history, the Battle of Hastings. The English army, led by King Harold Godwinson, held the high ground on a hill known as Senlac Hill. The English forces were predominantly infantry, heavily armored and wielding large axes, swords, and spears, positioned in a tight formation known as the Shield Wall. The Normans, under Duke William of Normandy, faced the uphill terrain with a more diverse army composition: archers, infantry, and a robust cavalry. The Norman forces were divided into three groups: the Bretons on the left, the Normans in the center, and the Franco-Flemish forces on the right. The battle started with Norman archers releasing volleys of arrows attempting to breach the English shield wall, followed by assaults from the infantry and cavalry. Throughout the day, the English shield wall held firm against the Norman onslaught, repelling repeated charges by infantry and cavalry. However, a rumor of William's death caused a temporary Norman retreat, which in turn led to the English to break their formation and pursue the retreating soldiers, a move that proved to be a tactical error. William rode among his troops, lifting his helmet to show that he was in fact alive, and the Normans turned back to attack the now disorganized English forces. The turning point came when the English King Harold II was allegedly struck in the eye with an arrow. The death of Harold and the exhaustion of the English troops who had marched from the Battle of Stamford Bridge created a breach in the English lines that the Normans exploited, leading to a chaotic rout. By dusk, the battlefield was strewn with the dead and wounded, and the English forces were decisively defeated. The precise number of casualties remains unknown, but it's estimated that thousands perished in the battle, including many of England's nobility and fighting men. The Normans' strategic adaptability and use of combined arms approach, employing infantry, archers, and cavalry effectively, coupled with the English tactical errors, sealed the victory for William. This triumphant outcome led to William's coronation as the King of England on Christmas Day 1066, marking the beginning of the Norman rule in England and a significant transformation in English society and governance. And now a little information about troop numbers and equipment. Estimates of the numbers of troops on either side vary wildly source to source, with some claiming the Norman army was approximately 7,000 to 12,000 men strong, and the defending Anglo-Saxons had between 5,000 and 13,000 men. With so much variation in these numbers, including a difference in troop advantage, it is difficult to say with any certainty how many men either side had. So in the interest of trying to make things somewhat quantifiable, we'll split the baby and say that the Norman army consisted of 9,500 troops, being a combination of archers, infantry, and cavalry, and the Anglo-Saxon army was 9,000 troops, mostly heavy infantry. So this way we're putting their forces at about the same amount total. Both armies would have worn similar armor at this time, with heavy infantry and cavalry commonly wearing a long knee-length mail shirt, commonly called a hauberk, and a conical nasal helm. Many soldiers on both sides would also be likely wearing a variety of other armors, including lamellar and linen armors, such as padded gamson. Large shields would have been very common, including large round shields, particularly on the Anglo-Saxon side, and the famous Norman kite shield. As for weapons, cavalry and infantry would have been both equipped with a variety of spears, lances, swords, maces, and axes on both sides. Archers, primarily on the Norman side, would have been equipped with early medieval bows, not the iconic English or Welsh longbows of the later medieval period. These bows were on average about 20 inches long and only had an effective killing range of about 100 yards in mass firing, with a point of target range being significantly less, perhaps as little as 40 yards. And now for a brief description of our modern troops, the 95th Rifles. The 95th Rifles were formed in the year 1800 as an experimental corps of riflemen. They were established in response to British officers' experiences with Indians and frontiersmen during the French and Indian War, which was the American chapter of the 7 Years' War, and the American Revolution. These encounters demonstrated the effectiveness of tactics such as stealth, marksmanship, and and deploying in loose, open formations, convincing many British officers of a need for a specialized unit that could employ these tactics. Colonel Coote Manningham established the corps with the approval of the Duke of York, the head of the British Army. The unit was initially formed by selecting drafts from other army regiments, and the soldiers underwent unique training. They were trained as marksmen, using the Baker rifle, and were taught to deploy in an open formation as light infantry, taking advantage of natural cover and working in small teams for protection. They were also trained to take the initiative in battle, and they marched at a pace that was twice as fast as the regular army cadence, allowing them to effectively position themselves ahead of or alongside the main army body. This regiment was instrumental in confronting and neutralizing the French skirmishers during the Napoleonic Wars, playing a crucial role in preventing them from disrupting the British lines. The successful deployment and effectiveness of this regiment led to the establishment of additional battalions of the 95th Rifles. These men were armed with the Baker rifle, a rifle with sight settings for 100 and 300 yards, often considered deadly and accurate for point of target shooting at 200 yards for the average chosen man. Each rifleman carried a cartridge box with 52 cartridges, as well as a ball pouch for 30 loose balls and a powder horn of fine ground gunpowder. Using the preformed cartridges, the rifleman could easily surpass 3 shots a minute. Using the loose balls, the average firing rate was 1 to 3 shots per minute. Mind you, these were not volley shots, but precise, accurate shots at specific targets. The men were equipped with dark green uniforms with no body armor and non-armored headgear. In addition to the rifles and ammunition, each man was equipped with a 23-inch sword bayonet that could be mounted to the side of the Baker rifle or used in the hand as a short sword. So assuming a standard loadout, each chosen man would have 82 shots from their deadly Baker rifle before running out of ammunition. So now it's time for the scenario. So given that we are dealing with two contemporary armies, similarly armed and with similar numbers, we are going to need to avoid upsetting the numbers too much, or we risk making the odds ridiculous. We are not dealing with machine guns or modern ballistics, nor long-range powerful explosives. In this scenario, however, the riflemen will have a significant advantage in range and firepower, as well as modern tactics, including target acquisition and discrimination for targeting officers, cavalry, archers, and battlefield directors such as flag signalers and banner carriers, as well as NCOs. For this scenario, we will be sending 100 chosen men with a standard kit to aid Harold Godwinson in defending England from the Norman invasion. This means the riflemen would make up a little over 0.5% of the total forces on the battlefield. Assuming 82 shots for each chosen man, we have a total of 8,200 shots before being entirely out of ammunition. This sounds like a lot, and would likely result in a great many unaccounted for deaths on the Norman side. However, it is important to remember that even in the best of scenarios, people are not 100% accurate and shots will miss targets. So we cannot say that 8,200 of the Normans will fall to rifle fire. In fact, I think it would be pretty generous to say that 15% of them will be fatal shots. But given that we are dealing with troops that would have no concept of rifles or long-range high-velocity projectiles, I'll say 15% is right around what we can hope for in this battle. So before accounting for mid-battle casualties, let's say the rifles would be likely to account for somewhere around 1,230 casualties. Bear in mind, these are of course tricky things to quantify, as the riflemen would be super deadly in this situation until the enemy got close enough for a melee engagement or within range of an archer volley, and then the riflemen would be at a significant disadvantage. The archers, in much greater numbers, would be capable of firing in much larger quantities, likely much faster, and in a melee engagement, the riflemen would be quickly cut down by better armed and armored opponents, who specialized in melee combat. So with all this in mind, it's important to remember the tactics employed by the 95th Rifles, and use them effectively here. Assuming there is no language barrier and that the Saxons welcome these futuristic time travelers, we will say that the rifles will initially split into two groups of 50, stationed at the outer flanks of the Saxon shield wall, taking the high ground on Senlac Hill. This would allow them to use their greater range and firepower to the greatest advantage and engage the enemy from 3 to 4 times their maximum effective range without any fear of reprisals. Obviously, the most effective orders would be for the rifles to target any visible leadership, especially William the Bastard if he can be spotted, but also including banner carriers, other visible nobility or knights, and then to target archers and especially cavalry with prejudice. The most obvious move would be to target the horses, as they could be easily incapacitated and would be much larger and easier targets to hit, leading to a higher lethality rate. And if the horseman survives the fall, they would be no more effective than infantry. This tactic would remove the Norman cavalry advantage, or at least severely diminish it, as well as potentially crippling their leadership and tactical tactical abilities. However, the riflemen would not stay on the hill forever. Inevitably, as the Normans would close the gap, the riflemen would begin to skirmish, as was their use in the Peninsular Wars. They would split into smaller groups, perhaps 5 groups of 10, and would evade to the left and right flanks using natural cover such as rocks and trees to their advantage. Their biggest danger at this point would be any remaining archers and cavalry, which would likely shift their entire focus to them at this point. They would utilize their highly mobile tactics to move and fire, staying out of range of enemy archers easily, and focusing primarily on enemy cavalry. This would have several effects. For one, the archers and cavalry would likely be more focused on the riflemen and less so on the shield wall, which would make the fight easier for the Saxon infantry. Another obvious change would be the additional Norman casualty, leading to a rapid deterioration in Norman morale and a reduced ability to skirmish and flank the Saxon defenders. And of course, the incalculable advantage of potentially killing the Norman leadership, especially William of Normandy, could have incredible side effects. Overall, given the battle was already close, and possibly could have easily resulted in a Saxon victory already if not for the tactical mistake of breaking the shield wall and leaving the tactical advantage of the high ground to pursue a broken Norman route, I would say the most likely outcome of this altered engagement would be a decisive Saxon victory and an utterly crushed Norman army and a dead William the Bastard. There are more variables in this scenario than our previous two, namely because if the cavalry would ever be able to close the gap between them and the riflemen would quickly be killed, and the same can be said for the infantry, although the odds of this would be much harder with the skirmishing tactics of the riflemen. However, under most circumstances, I think no matter the casualties of the riflemen, I think they would most likely deal so much damage on the battlefield before they were all dead or out of ammunition that the Saxons would almost certainly be guaranteed victory. But that is all I have to say about this topic for today. I hope you enjoyed this scenario. I certainly enjoyed the thought-provoking aspect of a significant advantage in firepower and range, but a disadvantage in nearly every other sense. I think it is very fun to consider and makes the engagement that much more interesting to ponder. But why don't you let me know in the comments section what you think? Would the numbers be too much to overcome? Do I overestimate the effectiveness of Napoleonic riflemen? Would the Normans simply be able to effect an organized retreat and live to fight another day? Why don't you share your opinions? But in any case, thanks for watching and have a nice day, and I'll see you on the next battlefield.